Guys, China's J-20 stealth fighter jet might just be a total tofu drag project, and it honestly kind of shocks me, but here we are. China has removed the portraits of 17 military scientists. Some have disappeared recently, others have been speculated to have disappeared over the last year or so, including the ones that worked on the radars that basically were used, well, used is in quotations because they didn't work in Iran and Venezuela, and of course, the lead designer of the J-20 stealth jet. You can guess why. Because they didn't work, and since their military is literally faking the capabilities, I have to ask the following questions. Which came first? Is it that the radar could detect the J-20 fighter jet, therefore they thought it was working on all types of stealth fighters? Or is it that the J-20 fighter jet's stealth capabilities are really bad, but of course they didn't know, so they thought that the radars were so good because they could detect it? It's like a chicken and egg question, right? Which one came first? Now, real talk though, the lead designer of the J-20, Yang Wei, had already been speculated last year, in the beginning of 2025, to have been in trouble. In January of 2025, he was stripped of his position as the vice president of the Aviation Industry Corporation of China. I guess the CCP didn't want to make it too obvious, too much noise at the time, given the fact that Yang has essentially been credited with as the father of modern fighter jets in China, designing both the J-10 and the J-20. If he goes down, that means, again, the entirety of the credibility of the PLA Air Force goes with it. Think about it, can China fake a 5th generation stealth fighter program? On paper, of course, it can't, and it probably didn't, because again, we have to consider that the amount of data that the program was able to obtain doesn't come from past fighter jet programs or real combat data, since the fact that the PLA Air Force has never been involved in real combat. So that's probably just data that they got from simulation or manned tests or even trials, perhaps with similar countries like in Russia with the Sukhoi jets. So the point is, because they don't have real combat data, the program in itself must have been tested. And so literally Iran and Venezuela were the first real tests for those radars. And remember the question, right? Did the radar come first or did the J-20 come first? And which one of them really sucked? Think of it like this. If the J-20 had been first designed, it would have looked really good on paper. You know, 5th gen fighter jet capabilities that can match up to the F-22s. Their entire anti-stealth setup was focused on detecting the J-20, right? The idea is that you build a radar that can work on the J-20, it must also work on par with the F-22s or F-35s. And now they found out that, of course, the radar system didn't work, so now they go back and they get the guy for lying about the capabilities of the J-20. So there's no like a timeline anymore for the Taiwan invasion. There's no timeline anymore for a so-called, China-dominated military age. The PLA Air Force may have just lost their entire competitiveness in this space, or this program, at least, to incompetency in paper talk. Now, I've never seen a paper tiger burn up so fast in real life. There's also another piece of news I thought that was interesting because it's a different angle at displaying the incompetence that we're witnessing. So China's supercomputer database was hacked by a person named Flaming China, or at least he's the one that's selling it. A total of 60 petabytes of data. That's going to take you a few years to download with our current internet speed, unless you've got your own, super ones. But the leaked data appears to have come from the National Supercomputing Center in Tianjin, which is a government-run supercomputing facility that supports the state-owned enterprises, universities, research institutions with this huge amount of data, simulations, virtual testing, scientific computing, etc. Now, these were sold on breach forums, which sells about 10 XMR in cryptocurrency. I don't think people are going to easily spend that, since the data that you get is really not useful to individuals. It's more useful to governments and maybe even corporations. But just from some of the sample that we got, again, this stuff isn't like, you're not getting the whole picture from it, right? So most of the visible files consist of proprietary binaries, simulation input decks, test results, outputs, and configuration data, which is tied to the science and engineering side. There's no, things that is really worth except for a few diagrams and codes, etc. But things like this one, for example, it's a document which carries a classified for 10 years marking, and it describes the damage simulation study on different materials with the effects of a high penetration weapon. The first one is against a HIMARS rocket artillery system, a second one against an aircraft carrier, and the third one is a World War II styled reinforced concrete bunker. So they might be working on something like a bunker buster or like an armor buster, something like that. Now, the aim of the study seems to be testing how efficient a high penetration weapon is against certain armors and targets, and which area is most effective to hit, densities of different armor variations, etc. It could also be the opposite. They could also be testing anti-bunker buster materials to see whether or not which they need to be using to construct their I guess it would be under the mountain bunker that they're building in just outside of Beijing. Now, one thing that really shocked me is that there's some files that looks like it's from Windows 7. You know, ideally, you probably see Linux-based operating systems in servers and in these supercomputers. But again, you know, never underestimate the incompetence of CCP officials, because the effort is really not about that, right? It's not about the technology. It's about corruption. So, you know, whatever they can do to get by. There's a third leak, and this one came from Galaxy, which is a Chinese data company with heavy ties to the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And it serves as the primary industrialization platform for data intelligence and big data directions from that institute. So the company specializes in big data analysis, knowledge graphs, public opinion monitoring, and private cloud services. And so if I had to guess, this is essentially one of those companies that serves to analyze and control, or to, I guess, to formulate plans of control on the amount of data that they receive from all directions, right, including from the United States and other countries. The data leak here specifically focuses on the Taiwanese politicians. So you got a lot of documents revealing that Galaxy has established what's called a Taiwan-related political figures network, and another one called Taiwan-related knowledge graph. Essentially, it's able to map out through personal details, contact information of these key political figures in Taiwan, like the president, former president, top lawmakers, their political affiliations, positions, birthplace, education, religious beliefs, social connections, attitudes towards China, and personal resumes. All of the data that they need to formulate plans to attack these individuals however they think can be possible, using the 23 million household registration data in Taiwan. So you can see, like, this entirety shows us three sides, or three different things, right? The first is that even when they have the ability to produce something, they tend to fail and it turns into a Tofu Dreg project. Something happens where they chase speed or they chase perfection in the ways that it looks good for the CCP officials, then that becomes a whole mess. The second one is if you're looking at what essentially is the ability for them to screw up the protection or the cyber security of a certain bit of servers or computers, it shows you that they're incompetent in more than one ways. And I think the third one, which, you know, it's the least talked about in this video, but it's hilarious because it tells us that, you know, a few years ago, right, when we were talking about why TikTok is harmful, people are like, oh, you know, just what's China going to do with one person's data? I'm just a regular dude. Like, what are they going to do with my data, you know? Now we find out that they actually implement things based on studying us. For example, you know, now people are saying, oh, China maxing, or I'm in such a Chinese time of my life, or that China is great, you know, or China's ahead of the US by 800 years or something like that, right? These are the studied products or the end results of that data study that they obtained over the last few years to analyze how we behave socially, what we're into, what we're talking about, what bothers us. And in turn, they build a profile that now works for those people who are blindly thinking that, wow, look, somehow this whole idea of China maxing fits me really well. Well, little did we know that it was catered to the people that showed everything to them a few years back. So yeah, this is pretty scary, but also I think it's just funny because of the incompetence. So much appreciate watching this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment. Do you really think that these are I guess, how do I even frame this? I guess the question would be like, what else is Tofu Dreg in China? You know my answer, because China fakes everything. But love to hear yours, so let me know your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our new channels if you haven't, or if you're watching on China Insider. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.